I didn't find out someone was trying to sell my lake from a lawyer, a letter, or a warning. I found out from a stranger. He pulled up to the gate just after noon in a clean SUV, stepped out with a folder under his arm, and stared at the water like he was already imagining it belonged to him. I was down by the dock checking a loose board when he called out, "Is this the access point for the lake lot?" I asked him what he meant. He hesitated, then said, "I'm here to look at the property. My agent said the seller would meet me." That was the moment my stomach dropped, not from fear, but from disbelief. There is only one lake on this parcel, and it's mine. Deeded, surveyed, recorded, not shared, not leased, not community adjacent. Mine. I asked who the agent was. He gave me a name I recognized immediately. Karen. The same woman who'd been telling neighbors for months that the lake was effectively communal. The same HOA board member who'd hosted informal viewings down here like repetition could turn trespass into precedent. I told the man calmly that the lake wasn't for sale. He frowned. "That's not what I was told." I asked if he had a listing. He opened the folder. Inside was a glossy flyer. Drone photos. Descriptions. Even a suggested price range. It described exclusive lake access and development potential, all written with the kind of confidence that assumes no one will ever ask the wrong question. The wrong question being, who owns it? I asked him who was selling. He pointed back toward the road. She said she'd be here soon. I thanked him for coming, told him there had been a mistake, and suggested he speak with his agent again. To his credit, he looked embarrassed rather than defensive. He apologized and left. I stood there for a full minute after he drove off, listening to the water lap against the dock. Then I walked to the gate. The gate had always been there. Simple. Metal. Meant to keep trucks out, not people. I never locked it because I never needed to. Everyone who belonged here knew where the boundaries were, or so I thought. I closed it. I slid the lock through the latch. The click was final in a way I hadn't anticipated. 10 minutes later, Karen arrived. She pulled up fast, parked crooked, and got out already talking, phone in one hand, keys in the other, irritation written all over her face. She stopped short when she saw the gate. "What is this?" she demanded. I asked her what she meant. "You can't lock that," she said. "We have a showing." I told her the showing had already left. Her face tightened. "You don't understand. This land is part of an HOA-controlled asset. You don't have authority to interfere." I asked her to show me the deed. She waved the question away. "We've been over this." "No," I said. "We haven't." She stepped closer to the gate. "Unlock it." I didn't move. "That listing you're using," I said, "remove it. Now." She laughed. Not amused, dismissive. "You're making a scene?" I nodded. "You're committing fraud." That stopped her. For just a second, the certainty cracked. She recovered quickly. "I'm calling the police." I said, "Please do." She stared at me, clearly expecting hesitation. There wasn't any. She dialed. While she talked, I pulled out my phone, not to record, not to threaten, but to open a folder I hadn't needed in years. Deed. Survey. Parcel map. The kind of paperwork that doesn't raise its voice because it doesn't have to. Karen finished her call and crossed her arms. "You're trespassing on HOA business," she said. I stood beside a locked gate on my land, looking at a woman who had just tried to sell it. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't curious. I was done. The sound of sirens in the distance cut through the air. She smiled. That smile wouldn't last. The police arrived faster than I expected. 2 cars, lights on but sirens off, rolling up the gravel road and stopping just short of the gate. The officers stepped out with neutral expressions, the kind that say we don't know who's wrong yet, but someone probably is. Karen moved first. She walked toward them with the confidence of someone who believed the situation was already decided. Clipboard under her arm now, phone in hand, voice raised just enough to carry. "He's blocking access to community property," she said before they even reached the gate. "There's an active listing, and he's interfering with a lawful transaction." I didn't interrupt. One of the officers turned to me. "Sir, can you tell us what's going on?" Yes, I said. She's trying to sell my lake. Karen scoffed loudly. That's not accurate. The officer raised a hand, not aggressively, just enough to pause her. We'll get to you, ma'am. He looked back at me. Do you own this property? Yes. Do you have proof? I unlocked my phone and handed it over. Deed first. Survey second. County parcel map third. The officer scrolled slowly, his expression changing in subtle increments. Less neutral. More focused. He handed the phone to his partner, who stepped a few feet away to look at it under better light. Karen noticed. That documentation is misleading, she said quickly. The HOA has long-standing control over the lake. Everyone knows that. The second officer looked up. Ma'am, do you have documentation? She opened her clipboard and flipped through it with growing agitation. We have usage rights, community access agreements, historical precedent. The officer waited. She pulled out a printed flyer, the same glossy listing the stranger had shown me earlier. This is the listing, she said. It's been approved. The officer took it, glanced at the description, then looked back at her. Who's the seller? She said her own name. There was a pause. The first officer asked, very calmly, Do you own the property? Karen hesitated. Just long enough. No, she said, but the HOA. Do you personally have legal authority to sell it? He pressed. She raised her voice. The HOA does. Do you have a deed or power of attorney? The second officer asked. She didn't. Instead, she said, This man has been obstructive for months. He's refusing to cooperate with the community. The first officer nodded once. That's a civil issue. She gestured at the locked gate. He locked it to interfere with the sale. I spoke then. Not louder. Just precise. I locked my gate to prevent unauthorized access to my property after discovering it was being falsely listed for sale. The officers exchanged a look. The second officer asked Karen, Did you list property you don't own? She shook her head. It's not like that. Is your name on the deed? He asked again. No. Did the HOA authorize you to sell property it doesn't own? She opened her mouth, then closed it. The first officer sighed quietly. The sound of someone realizing this call was very different from what dispatch had described. Ma'am, he said, you're alleging interference with a sale. But from what we're seeing, there's no lawful sale to interfere with. Karen's face flushed. You're taking his side. We're looking at records, he replied. Records matter. She took a step back, then forward again, voice sharp now. This land has always been used by the community. He can't just lock people out. The second officer met her eyes. Use doesn't equal ownership. That was the moment the ground shifted. Karen's certainty drained away, replaced by something tighter. Defensive. Calculating. So what now? She demanded. The first officer handed her the flyer back. Now we need to talk about why you're advertising property you don't own. She laughed nervously. This is ridiculous. He didn't smile. Ma'am, he said, this is potentially a criminal matter. The word criminal hung in the air. For the first time since she arrived, Karen stopped talking. The lake behind us was perfectly still, reflecting the sky like nothing unusual was happening at all. But something had changed. The bluff was collapsing, not with noise or argument, but with questions she couldn't answer. And the gate between us wasn't the only thing that had just locked shut. Karen tried to regain control by doing what she'd always done, talk faster and louder, hoping momentum would replace authority. This is being blown out of proportion, she said, forcing a laugh. We're just clarifying ownership. No harm done. The officers didn't respond. Instead, the second officer stepped a few feet away and spoke quietly into his radio. He gave a short description, then paused, listening. His posture changed, less casual now, more procedural. Karen noticed. You don't need to call this in, she said quickly. We can resolve this internally. The first officer shook his head. Once a property is publicly listed, and especially once a buyer is involved, it's no longer internal. She turned to me. Tell them you don't want to press anything. I met her eyes. I want the listing removed. The officer nodded. That's reasonable. Karen's jaw tightened.
Fine.
I'll take it down. Now, he said. She pulled out her phone, hands shaking just enough to give her away. She tapped, scrolled, frowned. It'll take a few minutes, she said. That's okay, the officer replied. We're not in a rush. While she worked, the second officer returned from the radio call. There's no record of the HOA owning this parcel, he said to his partner. No easements either. Karen snapped her head up. That's impossible. It's not, I said quietly. I checked years ago. She rounded on me. You've been planning this. I shook my head. You did. The first officer cleared his throat. Ma'am, have you collected or attempted to collect money in relation to this sale? Her eyes flicked away.
No.
Has anyone paid a deposit?
No.
Has anyone been told to prepare funds? She hesitated. The officer didn't press immediately. Silence did the work for him. Yes, she said finally. But nothing changed hands. The second officer wrote something in his notebook. Karen's voice rose. This is harassment. You're all harassing me. The first officer remained calm. Ma'am, you initiated this call. She looked at the gate again, at the lock, at the water beyond it. The scene she'd envisioned, buyers admiring views, neighbors congratulating her on securing community assets, had evaporated. What are you going to do? She asked. The officer answered carefully. At this point, we need to prevent further misrepresentation. I said I'd take it down. And we need to document that, he said. He turned to me. Sir, do you wish to file a complaint? I didn't answer right away. I thought about the months of community use. The casual trespassing. The way she'd spoken about my land as if repetition could erase a deed. Yes, I said. Karen exhaled sharply. Unbelievable. The second officer looked at her. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to step away from the gate.
Why?
So, we can speak without obstruction. She stepped back, arms folded tight across her chest. The first officer explained what would happen next: documentation, follow-up, potential charges depending on what the investigation uncovered. He spoke plainly, without drama. Karen's composure cracked further with each sentence. This is a misunderstanding, she repeated, softer now. The second officer asked, Then why didn't you verify ownership before listing it? She didn't answer. He closed his notebook. At this point, we're going to need you to come with us. Her head snapped up. For what? Questioning, he said. And because there's probable cause to believe a crime may have occurred. She laughed once, sharp and brittle. You can't be serious. The first officer reached for his cuffs, not hurried, not aggressive. I am, he said. The click of metal echoed louder than the gate had earlier. Karen's eyes darted around, searching for someone to intervene. No one did. As they guided her toward the patrol car, she twisted to look at me. You think you've won, she said. I didn't respond. Because I hadn't been trying to win. I'd been trying to stop a lie. The lake stayed quiet as the car door closed. And for the first time in a long while, the silence felt earned. They didn't take her away with lights or sirens. Just doors closing. Seatbelt clicks. Procedure. The officers told her she was being detained pending further questioning, then explained, carefully, calmly, what that meant. She stopped arguing and stared straight ahead, jaw locked, as if refusing to acknowledge that the scene had slipped beyond her control. One of the officers stayed behind with me while the other drove off. I'll need a statement, he said. We stood beside the gate while I explained everything, how the lake had always been private, how she'd hosted so-called community viewings, how neighbors had been encouraged to treat it as shared without a single document to back it up. He listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. When did you first notice the listing? He asked. Today, I said. When a buyer showed up. He exhaled slowly. That happens more than you'd think. I asked what would happen next. Best case, he said, the listing gets pulled and the HOA learns a lesson. Worst case, there are charges for fraud or misrepresentation. That part's out of our hands now. He handed me a card. If anyone contacts you, buyers, agents, HOA members, call us. I thanked him. He left. The road went quiet again. I unlocked the gate just long enough to walk back to the dock. The water hadn't changed, but the feeling around it had. It no longer felt like a place I had to defend. It felt settled. My phone buzzed. An email notification. Then another. Then several more. Karen's listing had been pulled, but not quietly. The platform flagged it. The comments were disabled. The description replaced with a bland notice about ownership discrepancies. That mattered, because now there was a record. By evening, word had spread through the neighborhood.
People drove by slowly.
Some waved. Others didn't look at all. A few texted asking what had happened. I answered honestly, briefly.
She tried to sell my lake.
Police stopped it. The HOA sent an email that night.
Short. Vague.
Carefully worded. They claimed there had been a miscommunication regarding asset classification and assured everyone it was being reviewed internally. No apology. No mention of Karen. The next day, her name was removed from the board's contact page. By the end of the week, the HOA announced a special meeting. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. The gate stayed locked. No more community events. No more wandering down to the water with coolers and assumptions. Just quiet. A week later, I received a call from a lawyer representing the HOA. Polite. Measured. Very different from Karen's approach. He asked if I would consider allowing an easement. I said no. He asked if I'd be willing to sell. I said no again. He paused, then thanked me for my time. That was it. The pressure that had once been constant, subtle, persistent, was gone. Not because I'd raised my voice or threatened anyone, but because the illusion of authority had collapsed under scrutiny. Ownership, it turned out, didn't need defending as loudly as people thought. It just needed to be clear. And clear things tend to stay where they belong. Behind a locked gate. On private land. A month passed. Nothing dramatic happened, and that was the point. No more emails about shared resources. No more signs taped to the gate. No more strangers wandering down to the water as if permission could be assumed. The lake returned to being what it had always been, still, private, and unconcerned with anyone else's ambition. The HOA held its special meeting without me. I heard later that it lasted nearly 3 hours and solved almost nothing. Committees were formed. Policies were reviewed. Language was softened. Responsibility was redistributed so thin it nearly vanished. Karen never came back. Her name stopped circulating entirely, not just from the HOA, but from neighborhood conversations. People spoke about her the way they speak about storms that passed too close, cautiously, with relief that they were over. I did receive one final letter. It wasn't from her. It was from the county. They confirmed that the listing had been formally flagged as fraudulent, that no transfer or claim had ever been recognized, and that my deed remained uncontested. The language was clinical, but the message was unmistakable. The matter was closed. I framed the survey map and hung it in my office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Not of conflict, but of clarity. Because the whole situation had never been about winning. It had been about boundaries. Karen hadn't been stopped by force or confrontation. She'd been stopped by a locked gate, a set of documents, and a few simple questions asked at the right time. No shouting. No threats. No spectacle. Just the quiet collapse of a story that couldn't survive contact with reality. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it arrives in the form of an officer calmly asking for a deed, or a listing quietly disappearing overnight, or a gate that stays closed because it was never meant to be open in the first place. That lake didn't need defending with anger. It just needed to be acknowledged for what it was.
Mine.
And now, every time the water reflects the sky without interruption, I'm reminded of something most people forget. Authority only works when no one checks. And peace often follows the moment someone finally does. That's all this was. Quiet justice.